The film begins with three thrill-seekers climbing an enormous stone wall. They are Becky, beauty Caroline Curry, her significant other Dan, bricklayer Gooding, and her dearest companion Tracker, Virginia Gardner. During the ascension, Becky needs to jump from her side over to Dan, who gets her. As Dan proceeds with his way up, he is surprised by a bat flying out of its opening, and he loses his balance. Dan holds tight and attempts to move back up, however his tackle comes free and he tumbles. Almost a year after the fact, Becky has turned into a heavy drinker and hasn't continued on from Dan's passing. She has additionally stayed away from contact with her dad James, Jeffrey senior member Morgan, since he told her that she shouldn't need to continue to grieve Dan in light of the fact that he probably won't have been who she thought he was, and he wouldn't do likewise assuming it were Becky that passed on. Becky later returns home from the bar and plans to end it all by going too far, until she gets a call from Hunter. She appears at Becky's loft to comfort her, as well as to suggest that they climb a television tower that is more than 2,000 feet high. Becky is reluctant since she hasn't gone moving since Dan's demise. Tracker stays with her short term. Becky has a horrible that Dan is close to her in bed, dead and bloodied. At the point when she awakens, she lets Tracker know that she recalls words that Dan enlightened her regarding not being frightened to live, so she consents to go with her to the Pinnacle. Tracker drives the two out to an area near the Pinnacle. They stop at a burger joint for food, where Tracker helps Becky charge her telephone by involving a light as a power source to connect. They then, at that point, remain at an inn for the night before their large trip. The young ladies drive out toward the Pinnacle yet can't go farther than the entryway, passing on them to stroll there. They find vultures taking out the body of a scarcely alive coyote, and the young ladies shoo the vultures away. When they show up, Becky nearly pulls out because of nerves, however Tracker persuades all her going. They start their trip and stop after 1,000 feet, where they notice the view up to this point, and Tracker remarks that they have passed the level of the Eiffel Pinnacle. As they get further up, they need to ascend one more 200 feet on an outside stepping stool, which is rusted and shaky. A few bolts come free as Tracker plays while attempting to move up. The two at long last come to the top and appreciate the view. Tracker takes recordings for her online entertainment page and uses a robot to. At the point when the young ladies choose to begin moving down, Becky goes first and comes to the piece of the stepping stool where two fasteners tumbled off. The stepping stool loosens up, causing Becky to drop their pack with the robot and their water onto a satellite down underneath. Tracker figures out how to pull Becky back up utilizing their saddle, yet the stepping stool to move down is totally annihilated. Becky likewise gets a huge cut on her leg, however Tracker makes a tourniquet for it. They find optics and a flare weapon in a compartment on the Pinnacle, however they stand by to utilize it until important. The two find that they have no sign up there to call for help. They think the stepping stool crashing could stand out, yet 5 hours pass and no one has called for help. Tracker attempts to bring down her telephone to receive out a directive for help by attempting to have the message convey in a meeting room. She brings down it to the extent that it can go and attempts to go lower, however it's no utilization. Short term, Becky watches a video from her and Dan's wedding, yet sees Tracker looking bleak behind the scenes. She likewise recognizes a tattoo on Tracker's foot that says 143. Which is something that Dan would agree on the grounds that he could never really tell Becky I love you back to her, rather tapping the quantity of letters in each word. Tracker tells the truth and concedes that she and Dan engaged in extramarital relations that carried on for quite a long time after they become inebriated, and Dan took the main action. Tracker says she severed it since, despite the fact that she had fallen head over heels for Dan. She adored Becky much more. The next morning, Becky notes that it has been 24 hours since they dropped Tracker's telephone, compelling them to recognize that the telephone is broken. Tracker then, at that point, says that she can move down to the satellite and get their sack to arrive at their provisions. She utilizes the saddle to bring down herself and figures out how to bounce onto the satellite. Subsequent to having some water, Tracker utilizes her selfie stick to snare the sack onto the saddle and afterward use it to assist herself with moving back up. While attempting to scale, Tracker slips, however seems to in any case arrive on the sack, though with her hands experiencing rope consume, compelling Becky to pull her back up. The young ladies then, at that point, compose a note and join it to the robot to attempt to send it back to the inn. The battery is excessively low, so they fly it back before it falls. Becky recollects Tracker's charging hack and moves to the actual top of the pinnacle to connect the robot to the light outlet. Becky hangs on for a really long time while a vulture flies toward her since it smells her leg wound. Becky figures out how to charge it totally and flies it out. Not long before the robot arrives at the inn, a truck collides with it and obliterates it, and the driver neglects to see it. Becky begins to develop more ridiculous from lack of hydration and starvation. She asks Tracker for her shoe so she can send her own telephone to call for help. It is then uncovered that the Tracker that she has been conversing with throughout the previous few hours was a pipe dream. Tracker never arrived on the sack and hit the satellite while attempting to move up, and she drained to death. Becky just pulled up the sack and was envisioning Tracker to not have the option to confront the way that she is up there isolated. The following morning, the vulture has tracked down Becky dozing and attempts to pick at her leg. Becky then snatches the vulture by the neck and slams it until it's dead, and she starts to eat it. Becky acknowledges she has one final opportunity to make do, and she makes an impression on James, saying sorry for how she treated him when he was only paying special attention to her. She descends to the satellite and removes Tracker's shoe to place her telephone in, and afterward stuffs the shoe to place her telephone in, and afterward stuffs the shoe in Tracker's stomach since a vulture was at that point picking at her carcass. Becky drives Tracker's body over the satellite so the message can go out. James is then seen heading toward the pinnacle, where he tracks down an entire group of specialists at the scene. He finds them taking Tracker's body, which he fears is Becky, until he finds that Becky has proactively been safeguarded and cut down securely. Becky runs into James' arms and they accommodate.